On October 1st, 2017, a gunman opened fire on a music festival in Las Vegas, Nevada, killing 58 people. Have you ever wondered what it would have been like to have been there? What you would carry forward after experiencing such an event? Well, today we're going to find out as I speak to a gentleman who was there. Welcome to Beyond the Lens and my interview with Ryan Miller. Tell us about October 1st, 2017. What did that day start off like for you?
Oh, what did the day start off like? So I guess that day, so just to give a little bit of context, that was the second time we had been in attendance at the Route 91 festival up in Las Vegas. And it was a highly anticipated weekend. It was something that a small group of our friends really enjoyed. Just had to be in Vegas, country music. And so we probably had a bit of a slow start that morning after being out late the night before. But really, I mean, just, in anticipation of what was going to be an amazing final night of the show that weekend. We got up a little bit late, went to the pool. I mean, we were enjoying our day. I mean, we were ready to have another really, really good finish. Maybe a little bit sad that was the last day.
So when you were there, when did you first start to realize that there was something wrong?
Oh gosh. So unbeknownst to us, in the middle of the final set, we heard some noises that we thought were just firecrackers. In hindsight, listening back, I mean, just there was no way that was the case. But you just don't think gunshot when you hear a loud bang in the middle of a crowd. Particularly if you hadn't experienced that before. So it wasn't until the artist on stage at that time, Jason Aldean, started to scatter backstage with his band that we realized that there was something going on. Gunshots were coming from somewhere. We just couldn't figure out what that was or where they were coming from.
So what becomes your immediate reaction when you realize what's going on?
So I think first was what the hell is going on? Like, I think that's just kind of like the question you ask yourself. And then I immediately just grabbed at my wife. Though I was there with 6 other people, my wife was my number one priority. And so kind of grabbing at her and then trying to get some sort of bearing on what was going on. And not to go too far down this path, but for probably the entire time, I personally, and many of us that were kind of around the area, we thought we were taking fire from the street level, meaning that there was somebody or some group of people coming down the street and fire was coming up over the wall, but from very low level. We didn't think that we were taking fire from, 20 something floors or 40 something floors up. So
you couldn't really tell what direction or anything at that point?
Oh, I mean, absolutely not. I mean, so we're in this huge open area, which is acres in and of itself, not to mention the fact that where you are, you're pretty far down the strip, but there's still enough of an echo chamber happening because it's coming out of a building. There's buildings behind us. And so the sound was reflecting in so many different directions that you could kind of get a sense, and especially as you could hear bullets coming by you, you knew they were coming from one direction and passing across the other. But there was definitely, at least at that time, no way for us to tell, from what specific location, at what elevation. And it was just, I'm sure that if you are trained for this type of thing, so military, right, they're probably trained to detect things like this. But when you are in the middle of absolute chaos, chaos, that totally takes you by surprise. You're trying to protect yourself, you're trying to protect other people. Like trying to get your bearing on that as well is just absolutely bananas. I mean, it was really, really crazy. And I was trying to do what I could to keep my head together because I had a wife to protect and I had kids at home, right?
Right. And how terrifying, I would think, too, to not know what direction to go because you don't know what direction is safe.
Yeah. So interestingly, uh, for probably the first couple of rounds of fire, like in between every time he shot, like I was standing up to try and like get an eye on where things were coming from. And so again, if we would have known that it was coming from where it was, like I would have never peeked my head up over the wall. I would have just stayed hidden behind that the whole time because we would have effectively been reasonably safe. It was just, you know, being out in the open that, you know, was so dangerous.
Could you tell that it was one person, or did the sound make it seem like it was more than one person?
You really couldn't tell. And my mind immediately went to, so anybody that was definitely from Southern California, maybe even just familiar with the news. So I think it was back in the late 90s. There was a group of bank robbers that stormed downtown LA in full body armor. I mean, they just, you know, police were shooting at them, nothing was happening. And so weirdly, like that's what I was envisioning, was some either large group or it was some sort of terrorist attack. And so there was, I, I wasn't at peace knowing that it was one person really until probably early the next morning,
Wow.
because even after we scattered, so we ended up going south of the property down to the Tropicana Hotel. We were in the basement down there. We were actually in the casino there first, and then people yelled that there was another shooter, so people scattered out of that, you know, casino. Like it was crazy. And so, you know, news reports, they had the news on in the casinos, even though the casinos were empty. Like people either went back to their rooms or like they scattered somewhere else, but the TVs were on. And so even all the news was reporting that there was talk of multiple shooters. You know, I think it was a combination of people just being freaked out, people being dramatic, people wanting to just tell a story. And then even like anytime you heard a loud bang, it was like, is that another one? And I mean, again, because at this point they're starting to talk on the news about it was coming from a window of a hotel. Then it was like, well, are they planted in other hotels? Like, is this coming from somewhere else? There was even like some terrible feeling of like, is this the beginning of a real attack? And then like bombs are coming next. Like, what was it? Like, we just had no idea.
So at this point, did you only have your wife with you? What about the rest of your group?
Yeah. So there was quite a few more of us. There was about 12 or so of us in total that were kind of together, but there was 7 of us that had gone up there together that were very, very close. So when the second round of gunfire happened, I jumped on top of my wife, and then we kind of started to get a little bit spread out. When we got up, that's when we noticed. So one of our good friends was one of the 58 that was killed, and so when I got up, my wife realized that she was bleeding. Our friend was bleeding. And so then I and one of my other buddies who was dating her at the time, we tried to pick her up. And I mean, this just sounds so terrible. I just don't know how else to say this in the moment. Like, she was just dead weight. You know, I mean, she
Right.
had not died at that point, but she was definitely like, you know, just struggling to breathe. And so we were having a hard time picking her up, and then the crowd was starting to move. And so I didn't want my wife to get trampled. And so
Right.
I was trying to keep on her as people were running. So another round of gunfire happened, jumped on my wife. And then when that one broke, we moved off to the side of the property, which was, there were some bleachers that were near us that were close for us to be at. So I went there with my wife. My one friend stayed out over the top of Nicole, like for quite a while longer. And then the other 3 people kind of scattered in their direction. And so we didn't get like reconnected physically. So that happened at about 10 o'clock that night. We didn't see anybody for the first time until about 4:30 in the morning. And that's because we ended up being diverted into the Tropicana Hotel, which once everything kind of got structured to some degree, they put us down into a basement at the very bottom of the hotel. The military came in. They were checking every single person. And so we were quarantined to that hotel until about 4:30. And then we were told we could leave, but we couldn't go back to our hotel because my wife and I were staying at the Mandalay Bay, and that's where the shooter was. That's where the investigation was. So we had to go back to another hotel which is where our other friends were staying. And that's when we were reunited for the first time. Like physically.
So at what point were you allowed to go back to your friend who was shot?
Never.
Really?
So, again, so like my number one priority was my wife. And you know, we left the property and then to the Tropicana, back to then back to the other hotel. They were staying at the Luxor. And so when we started talking, so now it's 5:30 in the morning or something like that, they had shut it down. Like nobody could go in. Like if you hadn't been in there at that moment, like you weren't getting back in. And so we didn't get a notification that they even had her for over 24 hours.
Wow.
So, and it was because, and this happened to a lot of the victims, people didn't have IDs on them. So maybe like they were in a, like for her, she was carrying a little bag separate. The only way they were able to identify her was in order to get into the venue, you needed to have a bracelet on that was registered with your information, your credit card, so you could like buy food and drinks and things. And so that's how they first identified her, was they were able to scan that bracelet. But I mean, her parents came up and, you know, they couldn't even, like, they wouldn't let them go into the collection area that they had at the hospital until they were able to verify each person. And so she was one of the later ones that was identified, and we don't know why. We don't know if like how they came in or, you know, what happened. They never really told us that part of the process.
And I don't recall hearing too much about any of the victims as far as things about them. Why don't you tell us a little bit about her?
Yeah, so it's been a long time since I've been asked that. So she was, first I should say that, you know, telling these stories, it's always really easy to over glorify people because,
Sure.
you know, after death, it's like, let's just
Sure.
talk about all the really great things. So we all have our faults, right? But, you know, on the bright side of her really was, so she was just the life of every party. She always wanted to make sure that everybody was having a good time, that everybody was happy. She had just a huge, beautiful smile on her face all the time. And she was just in a season of life where she was in some ways kind of rediscovering some things about herself, and she just wanted to live life to the fullest. And so, yeah, I mean, we always had so much fun together. We have a very, very tight knit group of people. There's about 15 to 18 adults plus kids. And so we had spent as a whole group many, many weekends together. But even the smaller group, I mean, this I think was our 15th or 17th concert that year.
Wow.
Mostly country concerts. And so she was so fun. She was so sweet. And so, I mean, obviously, you know, in the aftermath of everything, while there's a lot to deal with, you know, definitely just the absence of her has been extremely hard for all of us. And then in particular, one of our friends, they were the closest of everybody, two ladies. And so, I mean, still to this day, I mean, she has hard times getting through the day sometimes. And, you know, I'm fortunate enough to have a woman by my side that not only, you know, I mean, obviously we went through that together, but we're able to support each other and be there for each other. And unfortunately, you know, some people don't have that. And so it makes it that much harder sometimes to process those things.
Right. So the next morning, 4:30, you're kind of now in a little bit of the aftermath. So what What was your experience and your reaction at that point?
Mm. Um, well, so it had been just one continuous day. I mean, I don't think I slept for about, 2.5 days or something like that in total. But, um, you know, I would say that like kind of that next chapter, micro chapter of that day was probably about 9:30 in the morning. We were able to get back to our hotel and get our stuff. And so we rushed to the hotel as soon as we got word we could. It just, the whole entire city felt just like darkness. It was just very icky. Again, just an
Mhm.
odd description, but and so we just wanted to get our stuff and get out of there. So we grabbed our stuff, we packed up as quickly as we could. All we wanted to do was get home to our kids, and we went down to get our car out of valet, and the line was just forever long, and so we're waiting and waiting and waiting, and finally it's our turn, and the valet came up to us and he said, "I'm really sorry," he says, "but the police just shut down valet because that's where the shooter's car was, and so we were not able to get your car out." And my wife just lost it, and rightfully so. Just
Yeah.
the thought of like, wait a minute, like all we want to do is get out of here, all we want to do is get home, and now we can't even leave. And so we sat for about 2 hours. The Mandalay Bay, with a lot of things that they did not do well in handling this. One thing I will say was their people were so considerate of every single human being that morning. They opened up a couple restaurants downstairs and just provided free food and drinks for anybody that wanted anything. And they were trying to open up space for people to sit and lay or whatever. And I mean, just so kind in that regard. And so finally, about 2 hours later, we still hadn't heard anything, but we needed to get home. And so we went back to valet. And just as I went up to talk to one of the guys, I noticed our car was parked right in the front. And I went up to the valet manager and I said, "Hey, that's our car. They told us you couldn't get it out." And he goes, "Oh my gosh, I'm really sorry. You were actually the last car that made it out, and my guys must have made a mistake." So thank God, I mean, as quickly as we could, we grabbed our keys, we got in the car. And for us, that drive is typically about 3.5 hours. And I think I tried to make it in 2. It felt like about 10. It was just wanting to get home so, so bad.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
When you go through an experience of this magnitude, how does that begin to manifest itself in your life going forward, or did it?
Oh yeah, in a million different ways, and I'll say that my experience is far different, probably than every one of the other 22,000 people that were there. There's things I'm sure that we share in, but this far along, I know that there's still people that are having a hard time getting out of their house.
Wow.
And so obviously, like, my heart is very sensitive to this situation because mine is not a prescription. Um, that said, for me, obviously never had dealt with anything in that, like that in my life. And I've gone through some pretty difficult things over the course of, my adult life, definitely. But, it was, as I tried to step back into some normalcy, and we had people around us that were so kind, that were supportive, bringing us food and, just trying to do what they could to be there. It was hard at times just to go through like life, and so it took about 2 weeks to go back to work. And I think I was 2 days into being back to work. My work was super kind and just like, hey, however much time you need off. They would have given me much more, but I needed to try and get back into a rhythm. And I think the first day I made it a couple hours, and I'm like, I just got to get out of here. And so I think it was 2 or 3 days in, was my first kind of big moment. And I was sitting in my office. I'd gone through some challenge at work in that last year, nothing too big, but kind of questioning whether that was where I needed to be. And then in that moment, sitting in my office that day, I asked myself, like, what in the hell am I doing with my life? And it was the first like true moment of reflection I had in a long time. I am very, very purpose driven, very intentional, very habitual and disciplined, good and bad. But there was something about me asking myself that question that was really calling into question, my purpose in life. Like, am I sitting here living that out, or have I found my place in a state of contentment because of comfort? And not that there's anything wrong with that, right? Like, we should seek out contentment and comfort. But I felt like I was dealing with things that maybe I didn't need to, that I was holding back on being able to exercise gifts and talents that I felt I was given. And so that began a 5-6 month journey of talking and praying about it with my wife, speaking with my executive coach and some other friends, to where finally in May of 2018, really catalyzed by that event, I resigned my job and went back into business for myself again. So, and along the way, one of the greatest, I'll say, negative effects I had was, I'd never struggled with any kind of anxiety. I mean, maybe anxious in situations, but nothing of a big deal. And what I realized is when there was heightened levels of stress, maybe even just a hard conversation, that my anxiety level just got really, really high. And I've always been able to really well control myself. And it just presented a lot of unknown. Like, am I going to have, and I didn't, thank God, but like, am I going to have some crazy outburst, or am I just going to lay into somebody? And so I started having some of those struggles. And that didn't actually come to light completely until another year after that. In April of 2019, I had what I would say was probably the first ever true anxiety attack and bout of depression I had ever had in my life. So, some of those things, it just took a long time, I think, for them to finally find their way out.
Sure. And I don't think that that is uncommon when people go through major events such as
Mm-hmm.
you did. I know that some people that I've spoken to also, sometimes they have PTSD from a different event that is triggered by something else.
Yeah. 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 And again, I dealt with divorce when I was very young, some abusive relationships that my mom had towards me and my brother. So I watched and dealt with a lot of that stuff. Some really tough stuff when I was young, a decade of separation from my biological father, and dealing with a lot of things around that. A year before Route 91, a girl that I worked with was reasonably close to committed suicide.
Wow.
And so, I had dealt with so many different experiences, just this emotional roller coaster. I'm also a pastor of a church. And so walking through very, very difficult struggles with other people. And so it's interesting because I think that we never know the one that's really going to get us, and we never know how we're going to deal with some of the things that we do. Just kind of like as a side note here. So like when the woman that I worked with committed suicide, that really challenged my personal relationship with God in such a way that I was questioning, like, how could you let this happen? Like, this wonderful young woman, so much life ahead of her. She believed in you too. Like, how does this happen? And it was really hard for me to go through that. Whereas Route 91, whereas I lost one of my best friends, just this traumatic experience for my wife and myself. And I didn't have that same type of struggle then. And so it was almost like I was being prepared earlier for something that could have far more derailed me later on. So I just think that we have so many of these experiences and they affect us so differently. It's just trying to do the best we can to step through them and being aware of who we are in the process.
What do you think that you will carry with you from that day? And is it something that you can use to make you stronger, or is it something that you think will always hold you back?
Yeah. So two things I think are most important. One is there is always this cliche that you never know what you got until it's gone. And life is only but a moment away from ending, right? All these kind of like sayings. And then it really happens. And so in that sense, I realized that like I everything could have ended. I could have lost my life. My wife could have lost hers. Like if I would have lost my wife, my life would be far different right now. Like I would have been absolutely destroyed, and I don't know how I would have gone on, but by the grace of God and the need to be here for my children.
Because
So
if I recall, you told me that you didn't realize that she had a bullet come really close to her until after the fact.
yeah, one missed her by about an eighth of an inch right through her hat. And so, yeah, I mean, like if that's an eighth of an inch difference, right? I mean, we're talking just millimeters. My life is so different. And so on that side of things, it's people. I will do everything I can to have those relationships, to establish those relationships, not to waste those relationships. But even far beyond that, it's doing a better job of understanding other people. So I'm a huge fan of Stephen Covey. He says, seek first to understand and then be understood. That's one of his 7 habits. And so taking the time to understand people has become a big passion of mine, all the way up to, and this is going to sound, this could be really hard for some people to hear, but like even the man that took all those lives, like there was something going on in his head, and there's a lot of contributing factors probably to why he did what he did, but at some point that was a human being, and he had his own struggles and hurt and twisted ways about him, and all the investment in the world maybe would not have changed that. But I just feel like there's so many people around here that as soon as we find some kind of opposition, we put this wall up and we start in many narratives, like just crying out just this hatred towards other people because they don't think like us, believe like us, look like us. And so I really want to bridge that gap, in any way I can. And so that's one. That was a long answer. And then the other one is much shorter, which is shortly after we went through that event, the 6 of us that made it home, we had committed that we were not going to allow that event to rob us of our joy. And so moving forward, as best as possible, and the Bible talks about this quite a bit, but it's like, we want to seek joy in all circumstance. And that's a really freaking hard thing to do at times. But the more that we have tried to strive for that and find joy in the smallest moments, in the really big ones, even in the difficulties, I've just found to be so much more happy.
And some of what you said reminds me, there is a saying that to the effect of that we can't choose what happens to us, but we can choose how we respond.
Yes.
So with that, how have you chosen to respond to this?
Yeah, I mean, so that saying, I mean, you nailed it on the head, right? So this, I'm a coach professionally, and so I'm trying to help people with their goals and obstacles. And I tell people this all the time: like, we have no control over the outcome of our situations. We have a lot of influence at times, but we have zero control. But like you said, we have control over how we react. We have a control over the effort that we put into whatever it is we can contribute to doing. And then we have control over the response and the reaction. So again, it's, and I'm far from nailing this, but I want to do a better job about, having enough self-awareness to understand how I may react to situations as I step into them. So I'm kind of preparing myself ahead of time. And so that's a lot of self-study, taking a lot of feedback from other people that isn't always easy to hear. And then not only that, but then again, like, understanding other people and where they come from. We're born into and brought up with so many biases, and some are understandable, others are the result of some really terrible things. And so we need to understand, our own bias and other people's own bias, and again, be willing to bridge that gap and have those conversations and build those relationships. So when we do hear something or a situation happens, we don't overreact because we have dehumanized what's going on. It's like we need to put human into these things and realize that we're all just a whole bunch of messed up human beings trying to do the best we can with the life that we've been given. And if we do a better job about the responses, verbally and by action to the things that are happening, gosh, we would just be in such a better place.
Yeah. You had made a comment to me at one point that you're an open book with many torn pages. Tell me what that means.
Oh boy. Yeah, this is a whole nother episode. um, yeah, so, for a long time, I would say probably until I was in my late 20s, maybe early 30s, I always wanted everyone to see the best of me. I am a hard worker. I've been very blessed to be fairly successful in the things that I've stepped into professionally, personally, sports wise, like athletics growing up and things like that. And so that's all I wanted people to see. And it becomes a full-time job trying to cover up, not even because of bad things, just in general, trying to cover up like the failures, the struggles, the insecurities. And so little by little, I've tried to be a little bit more open about that. But really over the last couple of years, I've spent a lot of time, and again, context appropriate, audience appropriate. I really spent a lot of time trying to dig up my past and bring to light what my life looks like. And I'm no big name. It's not like people want to know the rags to riches story or something like that. But I feel as I've been able to do that, as I've been able to share stories of like my wife and I, we're about to celebrate 19 years of marriage. I never thought I could possibly love anyone as much as I love my wife today. I would have said that a year ago, and I would have said that the year before. But like our fourth and fifth year of marriage, we've really struggled, and we were, divorce was at least brought up a couple of different times or a few different times, and I contributed significantly to that struggle and that negativity. Like I was often self-serving and self-seeking, even though I wouldn't have always said it that way. So, again, it's like, I want people to know that, like, people see us now on social media or whatever, and they're like, oh, you have such an amazing marriage. I'm like, yes, we do. But I want to tell you like what it was like, the reality. Or professionally, like, I spend a lot of time on LinkedIn, and people are like, man, you're nailing it. And I'm like, first of all, I'm not, right? Like everybody looks like they're a multi-billionaire on, on social media when you try. But I want them to know, like, I'm working really, really hard, but like, here's where I had struggled. Here's where I am struggling. Like I was doing a workshop the other day, and I was talking to this group of people about performance and achieving at the highest level. And, all these things you can do to build in really good habit and discipline around that. And he goes, and he was very, very kind about the way he said this, but he basically said like, well, yeah, it's probably pretty easy for you because of where you're at. And I'm like, look, buddy, like, I just want you to know, I said, for example, I said 2019 was the most financially successful and the most fulfilling year of my entire life, bar none. I said, and yet in the middle of 2019, I had the greatest meltdown I've ever had. And for the first time in my life, experienced anxiety and depression. So I want you to know that it's not all unicorns and rainbows. And so when I have struggles, if I have a struggle today, I actually go to social media first, and I'll find a way to communicate that to not only allow people to see me for who I am, but I want to give people permission. And again, not that I'm the word that's going to do that, but like just giving people the opportunity to be themselves. Like we spend so much time trying to be something else because of what society says, or our parents have told us, or maybe a relationship has told us. And yeah, we can set some targets and we can grow, but I believe we need to spend a whole lot more time understanding who we are and who we were made to be, and pursuing that and not being ashamed of that, unless there's real things to be ashamed about, right?
And I think there are so many more things that unite us and make us the same than make us
Yes.
different.
Oh, so much so. Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, like, not that this is the topic, but, politically in the United States, I mean, we are in one of the ugliest states of politics we've ever been in. And very interestingly, I'm sure if you sat down with the leading Republican and the leading Democrat and even the leading independent, like if you set them all down at the table, at the end of the day, they are probably for the most part trying to better humanity as a whole and trying to improve our country. Like nobody wants to put us in a pit. Nobody wants to like send us back 100 years. Now, the ways that they all want to get there, totally different scenarios. But nobody wants to hear that they're all in it for the end goal, right? They just want to sling stones and call names because you sit on a different side than me. And it's just, it's not necessarily the case. Like you said, we really, we share so much commonality. We just need to take time to understand that and listen and not be so quick to judge other people based upon what we think.
Right. So, Ryan, one last question for you. If you could go back and talk to the guy that began this journey, knowing what you know now, what would you tell him?
Good question. I think this is one that I should have prepared for and may have been given the opportunity and didn't. I think that it's the two things that I've learned, right? So I think that it's putting a significant value in every single human interaction that I have, whether it's the person in line at Starbucks or my spouse, and spending a lot more time understanding those relationships. So I think that's one huge side of it. And so I wish I would have done that a lot sooner in life. And then the other side of it is learning to seek joy in all circumstance. That's not going to negate the bad things that did happen or the things that are going to happen. Like I pray to God that I've experienced the worst thing I ever will in my life, and yet there's no guarantees here. And so I'm trying to put in as much work as possible now to find joy, seek joy, understand what that looks like. So when the possibility of something more devastating happens, I'm well prepared. Because if we wait until the moment to try and work on that, oh man, I mean, we are in a far, far deeper hole than we can probably get ourselves out of.
Agreed. Well, thank you so very much, Ryan. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
My job as a photographer is to see things in a different way, to create reactions, to frame what is seen so we can better understand. Here we take a look beyond the lens of what we may think we see or know about people, events, and situations. To subscribe, please join my mailing list, visit my YouTube channel, or look for Beyond the Lens on Spotify, Stitcher, and Apple. I'm honored by the people I work with. If you'd like to talk about shaping the way you are seen in photographs, please schedule a call. I'd love to hear from you.